this is the Node.js TSC meeting for April the 7th, 2016. With us, we have myself, Jeremiah Sinkfield, Michael Dawson, Josh Gavant, Brian Hughes, James Snell, Alexis Campila. And we have a short agenda today. Should we do, let's do a stand-up since there's not many of us and we haven't really done one recently. James, would you mind to go first? For like TSC related things specifically.
Okay. The TSC specifically, I attended the Node.js board meeting as an observer last week in Tahoe. Had a number of interesting conversations there related to the project scope for top-level projects. Also, a number of NPM-related conversations that I think we'll need to get into at a later date. This week, running the VM Summit and getting some other conversations going there. So that's me. I don't have a list in front of me to go through.
Alexis?
Yeah, the main thing I did was also attending the VM Summit. So I believe we're going to provide more detail later about it.
Sorry, I'm trying to take notes here and like conduct this at the same time. Michael Dawson, do you have anything to note?
I think just the same thing. Attended the VM Summit. That's it.
Brian?
So I wasn't at the VM Summit, but I've been focusing a lot on some inclusivity working group stuff lately, just kind of getting some various processes and things in place, just kind of making sure some stuff is in place so we can get started pretty soon on a couple of moderation policy related issues. So actually at one point in time, Jeremy, I do want to talk to you about the IRC moderation policy that's been talked about in the moderation repo. And that's about it for me.
I think that leaves me at the summit. Been diving into core, understanding how the VM, the native side of the VM works, and started to talk with Google a little bit about the debugging and diagnostics API stuff. Actually, I'm probably going to be diving into that more next week.
Okay, and then for myself, I've been working a little bit on a GitHub bot for making things smoother across the org. Hopefully I'll be able to schedule meetings and stuff in the future. I also listened to the VM Summit, and I'm going to be working on writing up an initial moderation policy for IRC since we don't have a really official one right now. So for review of last meeting, we had something on Node.js users feedback. Does anyone remember what this was?
Yeah, this was, the idea, if we needed any kind of more formalized effort to get specific feedback from the user community, and Michael also tried to speak, more to the specific target users. But it was really just discussing that, how we wanted to go about getting this additional input. Right?
Yeah, and I think the past discussion is we didn't come to we need a next step. I don't think there was even agreement that we needed to do anything. So it was kind of left on for future discussion, but there was no general agreement that we should even be starting to do something.
Okay.
Now,
go on.
I would comment just briefly that this idea did come up in some of the discussions at the Lab Summit. and I believe there was some discussion about the foundation trying to reach out more to some of these larger users to get more information from them about what they're doing and why and that kind of thing. So it's entirely possible that some of that will be covered through just foundation outreach efforts.
Right. Which you said it was discussed where?
At it's a board meeting, the Node.js board meeting.
Oh, okay. Okay. Is there? Maybe I'll talk to you offline about getting some visibility into that because I'm just interested in what we do on that front. Thanks.
I forget. Is there publicized board meeting notes? Is that a thing?
It's supposed to be a thing. It also came up at the meeting. Apparently, those haven't been getting published when all the board members thought that they had been. So they're doing some process checking right now to make sure everything gets published as it's supposed to.
Okay. Does anyone have anything to comment on the flattened project scope TSC big changes to structure thing that Michael proposed? I think last time we were going to lay this off for a while.
That was closed by Michael himself, right?
It's possible. I haven't actually looked at it. Yeah.
I think he abandoned it in favor of defining the mission on the TSC first.
So he says, I wrote up what appeared to be the consensus a few meetings back. It is now clear that it is not the consensus. There may not be a consensus to this level of detail. So yeah, it's something we'll be working on. Also add guidance to proposal section. I think we should be merging this now, probably. This is Michael Dawson's pull request to giving some amount of guidance as to what could come under the TSC under the current structure so that we don't have everyone under the sun trying to apply.
I don't remember there being any objections to that particular piece.
Yeah, I think it was just to wait until some of the discussions had settled down, which I think maybe they have. So.
Right. Were we waiting for a reply from the board from what Rudd was presenting for this, or?
I'll talk a little bit about that in just a bit. That actually relates to the scope of the of Node.js 4.
Okay. So that was review of the last meeting. So minutes for today. Our agenda, we only have one main item, and that's define Node.js core. This is issue number 84 on the Node.js /TSC repo. Does anyone want to take this away that knows a little bit more than me? James, maybe?
Yeah, let me give a little bit of the background for this particular issue and kind of go from there. So at the board meeting last week, Rod presented presented to the board what we had discussed prior about the structure that he had in mind in terms of the relationship for the TSC to the board, to the executive at the Node Foundation. And a key part of that discussion was, how do we make decisions about what top-level projects come into the foundation? How do we decide whose responsibility those things are? And also, how can we start becoming a bit more strategic about the decisions that are being made, right? And there are other things that are going on in the ecosystem that we also need to be fairly strategic about. The NPM issues that happened a couple weeks ago being an example, right? So he presented this to the board, and there actually was a fairly significant amount of pushback from the board itself in terms of the specific structure that Rod had in mind, because the board was not comfortable with the idea of putting the decision of what becomes a top-level project completely into the hands of the TSC. That it needed to be more of a joint conversation, and they had to be able to, weigh in on it too. I mean, there's a number of conversations. It was not exactly clear where that settled out. But the one thing that was very clear is that the board does not have a clear understanding of how of what the TSC considers the node core, right? And what is the scope of that? And the board made a very specific request to us, TSC, to provide them with that clear description of what we consider our scope.
So the question on the GitHub issue looks a bit vague to me. I think that maybe we want to clearly specify the question. So the question is, what are the responsibility of the CTC?
Yeah, it's like, or the scope.
Because what is core could be seen as what is the core distribution, what is the core platform. I mean, that can be interpreted in so many different ways, right? So if we scope the question better, we'll have a better answer.
So to put it a bit more context, I pushed the question back to the board that when a project wants to come into the foundation, there's two things that could happen. One thing is that the board could say that's a TSC decision that we leave with the TSC, right? If they decide they want to take that on. The other possible thing is the board says that is separate from the TSC, that is separate from Node Core. So that's going to become a separate top-level project that would have its own TSC that reports back to the board directly, right? The bylaws for the foundation allow both of those options to happen, and we have specific examples of things, of other little projects that come under our responsibility as a TSC. The CITGM is an example. LibUV could be an example. But if we had another large project that's already established, already open source, that wants to join the foundation, how does the board decide where that sits and whose responsibility that is? That is the context of this question. Is they need something that they can use, some criteria they can use to decide, no, that is the TSC.
So that's the ultimate thing that we're trying to define. What is the TSC responsibility?
Yes.
More than an abstract definition of what is Node.js for.
Right.
I remember there was some discussion a while back. I believe Rod was saying this, that there is a fairly large view that the TSC should have roughly the same scope as the board in terms of like projects it oversees, but where it differs is in the kinds of like execution that they take on. Do we get the feeling from the board that they tend to lean more towards this view, or do we feel like they lean more towards the view of there should be like in the long term lots of TSCs?
I don't think the board is taking a position one way or the other right now. I think what they're doing is they want to make sure that they have the information to be able to make a decision and take a position later if they need to.
Well, they might not be taking a position, but it sounds like they're at least like, if you're going to lean toward, if there was any underlying belief that we were supposed to have the same scope, there wouldn't really be much discussion about more TSCs. So they probably lean to the fact that there could be.
Right.
So that means that we don't necessarily have the same. Well, yeah.
Yeah. They very much want to leave the door open, be able to decide for themselves that there should be another top-level project or other top-level projects under the foundation that are independent from Node Core.
Do we? Yeah, I kind of get that impression as well. do we have a feeling if they are wanting us to have a more tightly scoped definition, or if they're open to wider definitions of scope?
That's hard to say. The specific ask was, how do we define our scope? Now, whether they'll look at that and say, no, that's too broad, or okay, that looks good, I don't know.
That's almost a different question then. Like, when you say, what's Node Core, you could say our scope in terms of, is it just Node Core or not, is a different question from what Node Core is, right? Because you could say that, well, Node Core to us means this, and we'd want to be autonomous in that respect. Like, if it's within Node Core, then we don't need to consult the board. But you could say, well, no, the TSC should be responsible for more than Node Core, but we accept that in the cases where we're dealing in something beyond the core, then the board needs to be involved as well. Like, so, for example, if you're going to bring something in and it's not, and it's in Node Core, you can make that decision. But if it wasn't, it would need to also include the board.
Right. So it's definitely not an easy question, and it definitely needs to be clarified exactly what is being asked.
Is this underlying because like we're chartered specifically to take care of Node Core?
Yeah, so it relates to things like Express, right? So whose responsibility is Express? Is it the TSC's responsibility to oversee what's happening there, or is it the board's responsibility to see what's happening there? And it really comes down to, well, does Express fall under our area of responsibility? Does TSC consider that it does? Right?
Well, I guess like the easy route. Now, I'm not. We don't have like everyone here, so I'm not sure if everyone would like agree with this, but the easiest route would be, well, we've always sort of stood for like a lowest common denominator thing that's still JavaScript and includes depends, or like sort of includes dependencies that like no one else really maintains, so like we kind of have to.
Right.
It doesn't include like dependencies. Well, someone else is already maintaining openness, so like we don't need to do that then. It's, not a big deal.
I still think the question define Node.js core is a bit misleading.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this would be a lot easier, perhaps if it was scoped slightly differently, if it was scoped specifically for
Like, for example,
the node, sort of what's actually core that we ship, but also what's required to build that if it doesn't already exist, and related things that the ecosystem will break without, like NaN.
So,
yes, well, I think the underlying question.
I don't know.
And the question that the board is bringing to us: what are the responsibility of the Node Core team?
To expand on that, though, so if we look out in the ecosystem, right? And the mission of TSC is to foster not only Node, but to help support the ecosystem as well, right? If something like, I'm just going to say, if NPM wanted to come under the foundation, if NPM started having issues, right, then that is something that could seriously impact the topic of Node and the use of Node. And that could have, even though it's not something that we take responsibility for now, if it ever reached a situation where it was in a crisis, would that be something that the TSC would feel responsible for? right? Because it is a significant part of the ecosystem, even though we don't consider it core now, right? So, or if NPM was going to come under the foundation,
Right. So
that's our responsibility.
I think this in part comes back to like this sort of thing that we've always, you know, we try to ship stuff off to the user land if we can, right? If we can somehow maybe define ourselves as, you know, a roughly lowest common denominator thing. So like Express already builds on, you know, HTTP stuff that we already have. So it doesn't really like belong in core in that respect. But something like, I mean, we've talked about this before, like serial port probably does belong in core because serial port is like a lowest common denominator thing. It just isn't in core right now. NPM is more or less lowest common denominator for like the sort of package ecosystem in a way.
Right.
So that might belong under us. It's a little less clear than something like serial port.
Right. And that's exactly it. I mean, it's a lack
But
of clarity.
I think it's like more clear than Express.
I think the initial question is more fundamental. Like, I don't want to speak for Rod, but he's not here. And I think what I understand his position is, you know, he does not believe there should be any other TSC for any project. You know, there should be a single TSC that covers all projects which are under the foundation. And if the board is asking, what are you going to limit yourselves to, the question of what Node Core is not necessarily the question to answer, right? It's because, you know, we may be able to say this is Node Core, but we still believe the TSC should have scope over things which we would consider outside of core.
Right.
Right.
I think the very first question is, like, do we agree that there should be multiple TSCs, or is it that no, there's a single TSC, and then, you know, that maybe is the answer. You go back to say, well, you know, it doesn't matter what Node Core is, because you know, unless there's a more specific question, we're not limiting our scope to that.
Yeah, I think that tends to be Microsoft's position also, is that the TSC should be a technical complement to the board.
Right, and it's a, like, I think from at least my perspective, you know, Node Core is the focus, but anything else that comes in shouldn't necessarily be a peer. It's like they're coming in because it helps Node Core. So
Right.
Node Core is still what the focus should be on, and so that this group needs to have a say and input on what's going on in those other projects. It's not like, here's a peer thing that came in. Well, no, it's a thing that came in because Node Core, it was important to Node Core, so it's not a separate concern, it's the same concern.
Well, there's like a couple things here, right? Like if we have like a node foundation that's like, it doesn't matter what level it's about core, what level it's about like node. There's always going to be some focus on like core because, well, it kind of holds the rest of everything up, right? So like if there's something up with it, well, there's effectively something up with everything else. It's sort of like I don't know, hierarchy sort of thing in a sense. Not to say that anything else isn't important, but you know, problems will trace back to it in a way, I think. I think there's also something to be said though, like, I don't know, the more TSC sort of structures, like even the more like working groups we have, the harder it is to tell what's going on, the harder it is to organize things. I mean, this definitely doesn't like if there were more projects again, like this group might end up looking entirely different. Like it doesn't need to keep necessarily staying the same people that we have here and into the future. But I imagine it will be harder to manage even for the board if there are multiple groups that have enough scope like this to the point that we're creating subgroups, if that makes sense.
So some of these board members, like Todd Moore, I'm repping on these other boards, and some of these other projects like OpenStack and these things, they're talking like they have multiple top-level projects, not just like 2 or 3. We're talking like double-digit top-level projects in those foundations, and they're used to doing managing those kinds of things. It's just whether or not we, as the technical community, want to emulate that kind of pattern, right? And it's personally, I feel it would definitely be a mistake if we try to go too broad. So we need to make sure that whatever scope we give to the board is broad enough to where we think it covers all the potential cases, right? But not so broad that they think that the board feels that we are trying to tie their hands on what decisions they can make.
James, are you saying that the board scope could be larger than the TSC? Sorry, I missed a little bit there.
Yes, they could. The board could decide that its scope is larger than what the TSC scope is.
I do think that as I understand Microsoft's position from my management too, it's that if we feel that Node is scoped to a certain degree, then the foundation should also be scoped to that. Like whatever we feel is the scope for technical stuff should also be the scope for the foundation. I mean, we don't want it to become an Apache where eventually it's still a foundation, but their project is gone.
Right, and Gene Hugo, at the board meeting, expressed that. I mean, he wants the Node Foundation to be scoped to Node, right? It's just getting a clear picture of what Node scope is, right?
Okay.
Here's a clarification question. Are they wanting more of like a detailed list kind of thing of like what it currently is, or are they looking more for like a definition that is very general, is more of like a decision criteria for how we could determine later on?
I interpreted it as a kind of a decision criteria. Rod may have had a different interpretation. So I don't think we're going to be able to resolve this today. We're probably going to have to carry this over to next week. Rod to be here and weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I think at very least we're going to end up needing additional information from the board. Like my question would be, in what context are you going to use this definition?
Yeah.
Like what is it used for? Because that will help us understand what the actual right answer is.
Yep, definitely agree.
Great.
And so like one thing.
Good.
Yeah. So I was kind of thinking that, going back to the what Jeremiah was saying earlier about, being fundamental to the project or foundational, and you can also say, what happens if this thing goes away? How much is Node impacted? So like obviously, just saying if Node core doesn't exist, the entire project is basically over. But I think there's been interesting conversations around NPM with this recently. And just highlighting how interconnected things really are. I think that's one of the things that's making this a difficult question to answer.
Yes. It definitely adds to the complexity and the difficulty to come up with a concise answer.
Right, and again, like you could say if like Express goes away, like that's pretty big because like a lot of people depend on that, and like to the point that we would probably want to do something about it, if possible, because it would hurt enough people. But we probably wouldn't want to take like necessarily permanent immediate responsibility for it. So like we wouldn't want to be the ones managing it if possible, for a long term. Mostly because, again, it's sort of like this userland thing where it's not really the lowest common denominator that we specifically take as our specific immediate responsibility.
Right.
Do we have a sense? I mean, we have the mentorship program essentially for that purpose. Do we have a sense of how that fits into this question? Is that something that the board wants the TSC to handle? Like, is that something the TSC should handle? Should be someone else that manages that program?
So the board is absolutely happy with this idea of the mentorship program. Now, there's a point raised that it's not really an incubator. We call it an incubator, but it's not really. It's just a mentorship thing, or some discussion about possibly renaming it. But they're absolutely happy with this idea that we would go out and actively mentor these projects that are having some issues in the community in order to help them remain vital and healthy. But at the same time, there's other concerns along with that. So it's not just about mentorship, but there's also concerns over IP ownership. So like with Express, the expressjs.com domain name. I mean, we finally got the agreement to get that transferred, but there's things like that have to have an owner, right? And sometimes mentorship is not all that's necessary. Somebody has to take ownership of those assets as well. And it's not always clear if that's the board's foundation to do that if we are mentoring a project. But then the question is, whose responsibility does that become, right? So it's kind of a weird thing where if the board's going to take over ownership of the assets, then you might as well make it a top-level project under the foundation. Okay. So there are some tricky questions that kind of go along with the idea of mentorship.
Right. Do we have anything else to discuss there, or can we take it back to the issue and or wait for more people to show up next week, since they probably will, given the fact that we had the VM summit this week and some people were away at that. Well, that seems to be most of the people here, so I don't really know. Maybe we're just waiting for Rob.
I'd say, we push it back to GitHub and leave it on the agenda for next week.
Okay, cool. Do we have? We'll do quick Q&A, or we would, but I don't actually have questions asked anywhere. I did ask for questions on the live stream, but there have not been any, so I think we can skip it. And if anyone asks anything, we can always answer that next week. All right, thanks everyone for your time. Next meeting is next week, and that is, incorrect date. Everyone knows when it is, so thanks everyone.
All right, see you later.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.